Most people think a town becomes creepy because of who died there. The ghost stories, the tragic accidents, the unsolved murders that turned Main Street into a cautionary tale. But that's not what makes a place truly unsettling. The real nightmares live in the towns where people stayed, and in the reasons they won't let you in. Number 10. Centralia, Pennsylvania. From a distance, Centralia looks like any other abandoned patch of the Rust Belt. A few streets, some old foundations, the kind of place that quietly gave up decades ago. Then you notice the silence. It's not empty silence. It's heavy, weighted, like the air itself is holding something back. Beneath that silence, something has been burning since 1962. That year, a fire ignited in an abandoned coal mine beneath the town. No one thought much of it. Underground fires happened, and they were usually handled. This one wasn't. It spread through miles of coal seams, feeding itself endlessly, turning the ground into a slow, invisible furnace. The fire is still burning today. Over the decades, streets began to crack. Toxic clouds of carbon monoxide seep through the asphalt. The road known as Graffiti Highway buckled and warped from heat rising out of the earth. The government didn't just suggest people leave. They revoked the town's zip code and used eminent domain to seize nearly every home. Most residents left. A few stayed. Today, only a handful of people still live above a fire that may burn for another 200 years. There's no downtown, no school, no infrastructure left. Just roads that lead nowhere and patches of warm ground where nothing grows. What makes Centralia unsettling isn't the fire itself. It's the people who refuse to leave. They fought the state for decades to stay in a place legally declared uninhabitable, living in a grid of empty streets while their neighbors' houses were leveled around them. This isn't a ghost town. It's a place where the problem was identified, documented, and then allowed to continue indefinitely. Centralia is what happens when a disaster doesn't explode, it just settles in, burns quietly, and waits. When you walk through what's left, you feel watched. Not by spirits, but by the stubborn few who chose to live on top of a ticking time bomb, waiting for the world to stop trying to force them away. Number 9. Helltown, Ohio. Helltown isn't officially called Helltown. Its real name is Boston Township, Ohio. The nickname came later after the town was emptied, fenced off, and left behind without a clear explanation anyone could agree on. In the 1970s, residents were told they had to leave, not because of a fire or a plague, but because the government wanted their land for a new national park. That sounded reasonable. What didn't make sense was how quickly everyone was forced out and how little actually happened afterward. Overnight, entire blocks were seized through eminent domain. People left behind half-eaten meals and unmade beds as the bulldozers moved in. Houses were abandoned. Roads stopped leading anywhere. And then the rumors started. Chemical spills, satanic cults, a road that drops off into nothingness, ominously nicknamed End of the World. None of it was ever proven. That uncertainty became the real problem. The buildings that remained weren't allowed to decay naturally. Many were boarded up with no trespassing signs that felt more like threats than warnings. Some were demolished halfway and left standing. Others sat rotting in the woods, windows gaping like empty eye sockets. What makes Helltown unsettling isn't the urban legends. It's the physical erasure of a community. The government didn't just take the land, they tried to delete the memory of the people who live there. They tore down houses, redirected roads, and let the forest swallow the foundations. Today, the land is technically part of a park. You can hike the trails, pass the remains of houses that once had families, routines, reasons to exist. But if you wander too far off the marked paths, you'll find the rusted remains of interrupted lives. You'll feel the heavy silence of a place that was legally cleared out, but never truly emptied. The government won the land, but the resentment of the displaced still hangs in the damp Ohio air. Number 8. Cairo, Illinois. Cairo, Illinois should have worked. It sits at the exact confluence of the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, one of the most strategic locations in the country. This was supposed to be the Chicago of the South. Trade, shipping, rail, industry. On paper, Cairo had everything. In reality, it lost almost all of it. At its peak, in the early 1900s, Cairo had more than 15,000 residents, grand Victorian mansions, ornate theaters, a busy downtown, built on the promise of commerce and architecture. Today, fewer than 2,000 people remain. Entire blocks of brick storefronts stand empty, slowly being swallowed by the earth. Cairo's decline wasn't caused by a single event. It was a slow accumulation: racial violence, economic collapse, white flight, and relentless flooding. Each problem made the next one harder to fix. Eventually, the systems that held the town together simply stopped trying. What makes Cairo unsettling isn't just decay, it's scale. This isn't a street, it's an entire urban landscape that looks like it was evacuated during a war. The infrastructure is far too large for the population that remains. Streets feel oversized. Buildings feel theatrical, like sets built for a cast that never showed up. Massive floodwalls loom over empty streets. The silence is so heavy it feels physical. The few residents who remain live in a city where the infrastructure is literally dissolving around them. In Cairo, the nightmare is the feeling that the world didn't just move on, it chose to forget this place existed. When you look into the dark, hollow windows of a $1,000 mansion, you realize the most terrifying thing isn't a ghost. It's the silence of a city that has been left to sink. Number 7. Miracle Valley, Arizona. Miracle Valley was built on certainty. In the 1950s, a televangelist named A. Allen claimed God had chosen this stretch of Arizona desert for something special. Healings would happen here. Miracles would happen here. People came from all over the country believing this was the place where faith and reality finally lined up. For a while, it worked. The town grew around Allen's ministry. Churches, dormitories, small homes, all arranged around a single promise. If you stayed faithful, this place would take care of you. Then Allen died suddenly in 1970. Without him, the certainty collapsed. The ministry fractured. By the early 1980s, what remained was one of the most intense religious standoffs in American history. The tension eventually exploded into violent confrontation that left several people dead and a community shattered. What makes Miracle Valley unsettling isn't the fanaticism, it's the aftermath. The town is dominated by massive, decaying church structures and administrative buildings that look far too large for the empty desert surrounding them. These aren't just ruins, they're monuments to a collective belief system that collapsed under its own weight. The people who stayed behind live in a place defined by profound, defensive silence. There's a palpable sense of being watched as you drive past overgrown lots and hollowed-out sanctuaries. Life here is too quiet for a place that once promised crowds, cures, and transformation. This is a town designed around belief, trying to function after belief stopped providing structure. The desert doesn't soften the failure, it emphasizes it. In Miracle Valley, the nightmare is the feeling that the gates never truly opened back up. The religious ecstasy has evaporated, leaving behind a dry, suspicious stillness, a quiet warning that once, an entire group decided the rest of the world was their enemy. Number 6. Hildale, Utah. In the red rock shadows of the Utah-Arizona border sits Hildale. For decades, this was the secret capital of the FLDS, a fundamentalist sect that turned an entire town into a private fortress. The creepiness here isn't about ghosts, it's about the architecture of control. As you drive the wide, quiet streets, you notice the houses don't look normal. They're massive, multi-winged compounds, surrounded by 6-foot-high solid walls. The windows are small, positioned high up, as if the buildings themselves are trying to avoid eye contact with the outside world. This is a town designed for peering out, but never for looking in. Even though the sect's leadership has crumbled, the atmosphere remains thick with heavy, watchful energy. You can feel the weight of thousands of secrets buried behind those cinderblock walls. The few who remain live quietly, following routines that predate most modern laws. What makes Hildale uncomfortable isn't isolation. Plenty of remote towns exist. It's intentional separation. This is a place where generations were trained to view every outsider as a threat. The nightmare isn't what happened a century ago. It's the modern-day silence of a community that was built to keep the world out. When you see a curtain twitch in a window 3 stories up, you realize those walls weren't just built to keep people in. They were built to make sure you never feel welcome. Number 5, Whittier, Alaska. In Whittier, Alaska, isolation isn't measured in miles, it's measured in floors. This is a town of nearly 300 people where almost everyone lives inside a single 14-story Cold War-era tower called the Begich Towers. It houses the police station, the market, the post office, and the school, all connected by a labyrinth of indoor hallways. The only way in or out is a 2-mile, one-way tunnel carved through a mountain. When that tunnel gate locks for the night, the residents are physically sealed into their concrete hive. What makes Whittier unsettling isn't being alone, it's never being able to escape the gaze of your neighbors. You live, work, and die under the same roof, trapped by brutal Alaskan weather and a single point of entry that closes on a schedule. When the sun goes down in winter, which it does around 3 p.m., the isolation becomes absolute. The nightmare here is the feeling of total, inescapable visibility. Imagine a life where every argument, every secret, every movement is known by the people across the hall. There are no private failures here, no anonymous struggles. People stay for the community, but the price is the total surrender of privacy. In Whittier, you aren't just living in a building, you're part of a captive social experiment that never ended. The town isn't isolated because it's far away. It's isolated because it was built to be. Number 4, Marfa, Texas. Marfa, Texas doesn't look lonely or dangerous. In fact, it looks curated. Deep in the high desert of the Trans-Pecos, this town sits hours from any major city. Clean streets, minimalist buildings, art installations placed carefully against the desert backdrop. On the surface, Marfa feels intentional, like a town that knows exactly what it wants to be. That's part of the problem. For most of its history, Marfa was a quiet railroad and ranching town. Then, in the late 20th century, artists arrived. Galleries followed. The town was rebranded not as a place to live, but as a place to experience. During the day, it works. Tourists pass through. $1-million art installations sit side by side with decaying adobe ruins. Photos get taken. The town performs its role perfectly. At night, the illusion thins. Shops close early. Streets empty out. The desert presses in from all sides. The population drops sharply once visitors leave, and what's left feels more like a set than a settlement. Too clean. Too quiet. Too controlled. Then there are the lights. For over a century, mysterious glowing orbs have appeared on the horizon outside town, floating, splitting, disappearing, without explanation. Science still can't fully explain them, and Marfa doesn't try very hard to either. What makes Marfa unsettling isn't what happens here, it's what doesn't. There's no clear economic engine beyond attention, no obvious reason for permanence. The town exists in a constant state of presentation, as if it's always being watched, even when no one is around. At night, as you stand in the total darkness of the viewing platform, waiting for lights that may or may not appear, you realize the isolation here is psychological. The people who stayed have embraced a reality where the horizon plays tricks and the wind carries sounds of things that aren't there. In Marfa, the most terrifying thing isn't what you see. It's the suspicion that the desert is watching you back, waiting for you to realize you've wandered into a place where the rules no longer apply. Number 3, Slab City, California. Slab City isn't hidden. It's not secret. It's not even particularly hard to reach. And yet, it exists almost entirely outside the rules most places take for granted. Deep in the Sonoran Desert, on the remains of a World War II Marine training base, lies what's famously called the last free place on Earth. All that's left are concrete slabs where buildings once stood. People moved in not because it was welcoming, but because it asked nothing of them. No rent, no permits, no questions, no running water, no electricity, no trash collection, and most importantly, no law. Several hundred people live here, depending on the season. Some are retirees on small pensions, some are artists, some fell through every safety net available. Others simply didn't want to be part of the system anymore. That freedom is real, but so is the cost. The landscape is a fever dream of rusted RVs, makeshift shacks, and bizarre folk art monuments like Salvation Mountain, all decaying under a relentless 120-degree sun. There's no one to call if something goes wrong. Conflict isn't resolved by institutions. It's resolved socially, or not at all. What makes Slab City unsettling isn't chaos. Most days are quiet, almost too quiet. It's the total absence of a safety net. The brutal, lawless sunlight where you're only as safe as your neighbor allows you to be. The nightmare here is vulnerability. This is what a place looks like when society doesn't retreat slowly. It leaves all at once, and what remains isn't a utopia or a nightmare. It's an experiment that never stops running. As you walk past rows of skeletal trailers and see the suspicious, hardened stares of residents who have seen too much, you realize the most terrifying thing isn't a supernatural entity. It's the realization of what humans become when there's nothing left to lose and no one left to call for help. Number 2. Colma, California. Just south of San Francisco lies Colma, a town where the silent majority is literal. Fewer than 2,000 people live here. More than 1.5 million are buried here. It's the only city in the world where the dead outnumber the living by 1,000 to 1. That wasn't an accident. In the early 1900s, San Francisco decided it needed the land more than it needed its cemeteries. Graves were relocated. Entire burial grounds were moved south. Thousands of bodies were dug up and shipped here. Colma was designed from the start as a necropolis, a satellite city built for the sole purpose of housing the ancestors of a metropolis that no longer had room for them. And Colma stayed that way. Today, most of the city's land is dedicated to cemeteries, not hidden ones, not historical curiosities. They're everywhere. Streets pass mausoleums, neighborhoods sit beside headstones. Funeral homes outnumber grocery stores. Every street ends at a cemetery gate. What makes Colma unsettling isn't death itself. Death is orderly here, planned, maintained. What feels wrong is how normal everything else has to be around it. People go to work, kids go to school. Life continues quietly between sprawling marble mausoleums and manicured lawns that never end. In most cities, cemeteries are edges. In Colma, they are the center. The nightmare here is the feeling of being a guest in a city that wasn't built for you. The few people who stayed live in a constant state of transition, existing in the narrow gaps between millions of names carved in stone. Even the city's motto acknowledges it. It's great to be alive in Colma. It's meant to be lighthearted. It lands differently when you're standing between rows of graves. In Colma, you realize the most unsettling thing isn't the presence of the dead. It's the way the living have rearranged their entire world to accommodate a silence that will never be broken. Number 1. Dudleytown, Connecticut. Deep in the woods of Cornwall, Connecticut, lies the dark entry forest. This is the home of Dudleytown, a place so supposedly cursed that it was completely abandoned by the early 1900s. Dudleytown isn't a town anymore. It isn't even a place in any functional sense. There are no residents, no services, no streets to speak of. What remains is a stretch of forest where something once tried and failed to exist. In the mid-1700s, a small settlement formed here. Farming families moved in, cleared land, built homes. It didn't last. Crops failed. Illness spread. Accidents were common. Over time, people left not all at once, but steadily, as if the land itself was pushing back. Stories filled the gaps. A curse, a haunted valley, a bloodline doomed to misfortune. None of it was ever proven. And that's part of what makes Dudleytown uncomfortable. There's no clear event to point to. No fire, no flood, no disaster that explains why everyone gave up. By the early 1900s, the town was gone. But the modern nightmare of Dudleytown isn't about ghosts or demons. It's about the absolute enforced silence that surrounds it today. Dudleytown is a total forbidden zone. The land is privately owned by a group that has made it their mission to ensure no one ever sets foot in the ruins again. There are no hiking trails here, no tours, no exceptions. The forest is guarded by a level of security and legal hostility that feels completely disproportionate for a few stone foundations in the woods. You are met with aggressive no trespassing signs and the very real threat of arrest if you even step off the public road. That only deepened its reputation, a place erased, then protected from being remembered. Walk through the nearby woods and you'll find stone foundations half swallowed by trees, moss-covered walls leading nowhere. Evidence that people tried to live here long enough to build something solid and still failed. The nightmare in Dudleytown is the feeling that something is being hidden, not just by history, but by the people who own the land now. They stayed behind to guard a void, and their refusal to let anyone in only feeds the suspicion. Most places on this list are unsettling because something happened to them. Dudleytown is unsettling because nothing did. People simply stopped trying. In Dudleytown, you realize the most terrifying thing isn't the forest itself, it's the lengths to which the living will go to make sure you never find out what's actually buried in the shadows. And sometimes, that's the most uncomfortable ending of all.